What's up, Change the Channel podcast listeners? My name is Megan Grace, and I am so freaking excited for this episode today. I had the pleasure of interviewing and chatting with Adrienne, the Yoni Nutritionist, who I have been a low-key super fan of for so long. And getting to sit down with her and hear all of her wisdom about anything from STIs to staying sexy in your 40s to candida to all sorts of things that are sort of taboo-esque topics that we are going to freaking change the channel on. So I'm so excited for you to be here. This is part one because the conversation just flowed in so many juicy directions. Want to make sure that you have time to absorb all this wisdom from her. And so go ahead and listen to part one and enjoy, leave your comments, sit with it, ruminate with it, and then be looking for part two for the second part of more juicy goodness from Adrienne, the Yoni Nutritionist. All right, y'all, let's get into it. Awesome. Welcome back to the show. On today's episode, I have another amazing guest, and I have been a fangirl of hers for a while on Instagram. Her name is Adrienne, and she is the Yoni Nutritionist, teaching us all things about breaking down stigma around things like herpes, HPV, reoccurring vaginal infections, and learning to actually eat well for your whole well-being, while also being just a hot woman in her 40s, walking around crushing it in all things. So I'm a massive fan. Thanks so much for being here.
Thank you so much for having me.
Is there anything that I missed as I'm raving about the things that I notice you showing up as on social media? I'd love to know just kind of, your moment and how you keep showing up so bravely in the online space.
I think maybe the best place to start is why I started doing this work, because
Perfect.
a lot of people, everyone always asks me that, what the hell? What? Everyone thought I was crazy when I first started doing this work 6 years ago, but it turns out that there's a huge need for it because a lot of women are struggling with their vaginal health and don't know where to turn because for a lot of people, their doctors can't help them. And this was my experience. I have been struggling with my own vaginal health for most of my sexually active life. Ever since I was 16 years old and started having sex, I was always sensitive to yeast infections, UTIs here and there, and yeast infections again. And, back then, and this was like, I'm 43 now, so this was a long time ago. We didn't have social media. Like, nobody talked about this stuff. We didn't learn about this stuff. So taboo still, but back then even more. So, always dealing with yeast infections. I was, on long-term antibiotic use as a kid with recurring strep throat infections. And then I was on long-term birth control ever since I was 15 years old until 30. I was on the birth control pill for 15 years. And my diet was very high in starches and carbs and sugars back then.
Well, yeah, they're all the tastiest things.
They're the best. I mean, everybody loves them, and they're the cheapest things. And back in the 80s, 90s, for the kids who grew up in those years, those are the things that we ate because our parents also just didn't know any better. Fast food, processed food, easy access. Anyways, it wasn't. So in my early 20s, I then got diagnosed with genital herpes and HPV in the same year from my second boyfriend ever who didn't know that he had it. And I didn't. Like, it was just like a shock because, these very stigmatized STIs, nobody knew anything about, nobody really talked about. And then in my mid 30s, I got something called candida overgrowth, which was basically a yeast infection that took over my whole body.
Wow.
And I was very, very sick for a year. And I was getting all kinds of weird symptoms recurring yeast infections every month before my period, cystic acne on my face so bad that I was embarrassed to go out in public, brain fog, chronic fatigue, all these weird symptoms I was going through in a period of extreme stress. And
Mm.
I would go to my doctor and be like, what's wrong with me? And he would just send me home with a prescription for a yeast infection, and my
Oh
symptoms would
gosh.
always come back. And I'm like, but there's something wrong. I know that
Mm.
intuitively there's something wrong. Well, I don't know what it is. Then I got BV, and then it was just this cycle. And it affected my life in ways that, it affected my sex life. It affected my relationship. It affected my
Hmm.
productivity at work. It affected my confidence in the way I felt about myself. And
Yeah.
when my doctor couldn't help me, it was so frustrating because we're supposed to trust our doctors, and we think that they are the be all and end all of knowledge, but they're not. And it was
Yeah.
when
That's important. That is an
yeah,
important thing to note, especially I think about women's health,
oh,
because like having a vagina is sort of, it feels a lot of times like having like a Rubik's cube, and you're like, I clicked this way and it worked really well. Why is it not working now? And I love that you, sorry to interrupt. I just
that's
I'm
okay.
inspired by what you're saying, and I love that you were like, I know my body. I know that there's something not right. I know that continuing to sort of pat me on the head and say, oh, honey, it's just this. How about another round of antibiotics and some more disrupted gut health, please? Like, whatever floats your boat. So that I just feel like that's important to highlight the idea that yes, medical professionals are there to help, but also we get to speak up about what we're noticing about our bodies and be empowered to say, we've tried this before, that didn't work. It's not working. There's got to be something else. I mean, now we have the Yoni Nutritionist, so that's amazing. But just wanted to
Yeah.
highlight that. That's amazing. So as you're going in for these appointments.
Yeah, it's such a good point. And so many women are gaslit by their doctors. Their doctors are telling them it's all in their heads. All they have to do is reduce their stress and stop eating sugar. Okay, well, there's so much more that goes into it than that. And a lot of times, and like, we need the medication to treat our symptoms,
Mhm.
but we also need a holistic approach to manage those symptoms, to prevent them from coming back, to prevent having to take the medications. And the
Mm.
doctor's not going to tell you about that. First of all, because they don't know anything about that. They got maybe 10% of nutrition training in school, and they want you to take the medication because they're incentivized.
Mm.
Uh, it's a business. If we're
Ugh.
taking care of ourselves, takes the business away. Anyways, it's a whole nother side
Love that. I love that.
topic. But this is why it's like you always have to be your own health advocate, especially when you're getting chronic, recurring vaginal health issues. And that's where I help women is people who, like me, who are struggling with these chronic symptoms and their doctors aren't giving them any solutions other than medication. And it's really affecting the quality of their lives to the point where it's emotional, it's
Hmm.
stressful, it's affecting all areas of their life. And they're like, what do I do? And unless they find me, it's like, what do you do other than try to figure it out on your own, which is a full-time job? And trust me, I've made it my full-time job.
Hmm. And we're glad
Um,
you did.
yeah, but it becomes a very emotional thing, and that's another thing that doctors don't want to deal with. They'll just rush you out, especially with something like herpes or HPV when there's still so much stigma around
Mm.
these things. They don't want to deal with that. And they'll tell you, oh, it's normal, it's really common, blah, blah, blah. But that totally discounts like your experience and your emotions around it because there's so much more that goes into it that doctors
Yeah.
can't help with. And that's why, like, when I started figuring out what to do on my own, when my doctor couldn't help me, I did a bunch of research and I figured out that I had something called candida overgrowth, which is the whole yeast infection systemic throughout my body thing.
Hmm.
And I did a candida elimination diet for the first time. This was before I became a nutritionist, and it worked. And I was like, oh my God,
Light
I've been
bulb.
yeah, I've been suffering for a year. No one told me about this, and my symptoms went away within 4 weeks after changing my diet. Mind you, it was a strict diet, but I was ready. Like I was so desperate, I would have done anything, and I did it, and it worked. And I was like, oh my dang.
Yes.
So I quit my corporate career and went back to school to study holistic nutrition so that I could help other women who are going through this too. And ironically, when I was in holistic nutrition school, I was max stressed and I started getting recurring herpes outbreaks
Mm,
monthly. So,
fun.
oh yeah, that's great. I learned how to manage those though. And also I have HPV, and over the years I've had normal, abnormal pap smears, like multiple colposcopies, the LEEP procedure. I had high risk HPV, so I was always worried that it would develop into cervical cancer. But now I've gotten 5 normal pap smears in a row.
Yay!
I don't get herpes.
Celebrate. That's
Yeah,
huge.
I don't get herpes outbreaks anymore, and very rarely do I get a yeast infection. So I know that what I do works. And personally, because I've been through it. And now when I started the Yoni Nutritionist 6 years ago, started helping women, I started hearing from women, me too. I'm going through all these too, like all of the things,
Mm-hmm.
multiple things. And I'm like, oh my God, because I thought I was the only one for so long. And nobody
Mm,
really, like, I would be crying to my mom, my therapist, my friends, and nobody really understood what it was
yeah.
like. And then when I started talking to these women, I was like, oh my God, we're not alone, you know?
That's an incredible point as well. I think that there's so much wisdom in sharing even your own journey with health. I feel like anytime I've shared something personal about myself, whether it's, past relationship trauma or, my own like battles with like STIs and that kind of thing, it inevitably, especially with women, it feels like you get that resounding me too. And like, oh, thanks for saying that. And it's so important for us to not feel sequestered away in our experience, where then it feels almost like, oh, there's no end to this, and also walking around feeling separate from the rest of our community, which adds to stress, which then kicks up everything else.
Yep, exactly. It's such a our sexuality is such a funny thing.
Mm,
Some people don't care, but some people really do care. And when these things are happening to you and it starts affecting your sex life, like I was saying earlier, just for me, it affected my confidence. Like I feel like I'm like a Samantha Jones, like oozing sexuality all the
indeed you are. Yes, ma'am.
time.
Yes, you are.
Like I have a very high sex drive. And when that was taken away from me, when that sexual liberation and freedom and empowerment was taken away from me, I felt like a shell of a woman. And
Mm,
it really affected how I showed up in the world. It affected my vibe,
yeah.
which for a long time, affected my mental health like very, very badly. But,
Yeah. Well,
work.
especially if you're meant to be a big, vibrant, like your aura is meant to expand and you're contracting in on yourself. I mean, I'm a body worker, and so people come to get different treatments because of quote tension and muscle pain and whatever. Really, what that is the muscle is usually constricted in or overstretched. It's not the proper like size that it's meant to be. And what it sounds like you're saying is emotionally as well, and even spiritually and all of that, when you are constricting in on yourself, when you're meant to walk through the world like Samantha Jones, and you're like, I'll just be over here, like, hi. Um, the world doesn't benefit from you being small, but also stigma and lack of education and fear and all of that serves no one. It just shrinks us in, makes us be a shell of people. And who has time to be a shell of a person? This world's got way too much work that needs to be done to have a bunch of people walking around like shells of people. So yeah, I hear that. How have you navigated being a Samantha Jones, like badass, vibrant, sexy mamacita in this world with dating and having conversations around, your own yoni health with potential new partners and all that. I'd love to hear your hot takes on that.
It's been an interesting journey in the 20 years that I've lived with herpes and HPV, the two most stigmatized STIs,
Mm-hmm.
yet the two most manageable STIs. It's funny. It's just our lack of awareness and education about it. We were taught to fear it rather than,
Mm-hmm.
actually learn about it. And I really had a hard time before that 3-year recurring outbreak phase. I was really confident and it didn't affect my life at all. Like I rarely had a problem with it. I would tell partners and they would be okay with it. And it really wasn't a big deal
Mm-hmm.
until I went through that 3-year phase of just constant outbreaks and issues, and it diminished my confidence significantly. It took
Mm.
a really long time to heal from that because it was bringing up all kinds of stuff for me that I had to work, that kind of forced me to work through a lot of my shit. And I always
Ugh.
tell people when I'm on these herpes support calls with clients, it's like herpes is just bringing up a lot of the feelings that have already been there. It's like a mirror that's right in front of your face, kind of
Mm-hmm.
forcing you to work through this stuff that you've been putting off for a long time. And when I did that and I started to learn how to manage my outbreaks, especially with this work that I do and creating a community of other people, of hundreds, thousands of other people that have herpes that are all going through the same emotions and feelings around it. Everybody has their
Mm-hmm.
different experiences, but we all have similar emotions and feelings. When I started putting all of those pieces together, I was like, oh my God, I just started to kind of let go of the shame and the stigma that I held within myself for a really long time. And I started just becoming more confident with it because I started to learn more about it, learn how it
Mm.
works, learn how to manage it, learn how common it is, and just feeling supported by a community like I'm not alone. And,
Mm.
I started disclosing with confidence again. And I found kind of like the right formula to disclose to people where I have an 80% success rate,
Ooh,
you know?
okay. So what can you share a little bit about the way that you either like your mindset around that, what you say, how you set it up? Because 80% is great.
Yeah. Well, in my mind, herpes isn't a big deal.
Okay.
I now feel that deep in my bones. I know that. I feel it.
Mm-hmm.
It's just because I have been through the roller coaster of every experience I can with herpes, and I rarely get outbreaks anymore. And to me, it's not a big deal. I know that the transmission rates are really low, especially when you're, doing all the things to manage it.
Mm-hmm.
So I feel already confident going into these disclosure conversations. And I try to make it more, instead of like a confession, which I used to do, which I used to like dump on people
Mm.
just because of my own guilt and shame if I didn't.
Oh my
You know,
gosh, right?
yeah. Now I make it more of a conversation instead of a confession. And I make it more of a discussion than a disclosure. So I, go into it and keeping it very simple and straight to the point, especially when you're dealing with men. Gotta keep it simple, take the emotions out of it. So I say, I want to have a sexual health conversation. Before we have sex, it's really important for me to share with you that I have herpes. I've had it for a long time. It's very manageable. I very rarely get outbreaks. We can still have an amazing sex life. Transmission rates are I don't even get to that point because the more info about it you give them, the
Mm.
kind of freaked because most people don't know about herpes, right?
Right.
Most of the time, this is their first time on a receiving end of this conversation. So I try to keep it very simple. It's important for me to share with you. I have herpes. We can still have an amazing sex. The transmission rates are very low or whatever. When was the last time you were tested? Because the sexual
Mm.
health responsibility isn't all on me, because I want to know what their sexual health history is too. And,
Mm.
it's kind of, it's not, I wouldn't say manipulating the conversation, but it gets them to stop, to kind of take their attention away from that information drop to thinking actually about, wow, when was the last time I was tested actually?
Yeah.
Have you ever been tested for herpes? Have you ever had somebody tell you that they have herpes before? Like, what's your knowledge of experience
Mm,
with it? Because, you know, 1 in 4
yeah.
people walking around with cold sores,
Right.
so common. 1 in 5 people have genital herpes. So if they haven't had, they most statistically likely have had already connections with somebody who has it, whether they knew it or not.
Yeah. Yeah. I love the idea of it's kind of a light bulb moment, I think. Being able to first say a thing like, I have a thing and I'd like to talk about it. I would love to hear your experience around this. So then they feel like brought into the conversation as opposed to like this sort of, I don't know, almost like the judge, jury, and executioner of this information you're giving them. And that also seems really, really important for battling the stigma as well. So it's like, instead of, well, I have herpes, therefore I know everything about herpes, it's like, what do you know about herpes too? Because this is a thing that lives in the dating world, especially if you're, non-monogamous or you're like trying to figure out whether someone is a good fit for you. Like people are dating multiple people often at the same time in varieties of ways. So I love that. That does sound like an important kind of cadence. And I think the part too about removing the emotion, because the story of when you contract an STI, I don't know, it feels like that can live sort of rent free in people's bodies, their memories. And so there's emotion around that, but that's not the moment that you're in when you're telling them something new.
No, and as the conversation progresses, if it progresses, you can then start sharing that information. But really, you just want to keep it at the beginning at 3 main points and really open it up to be a conversation because, again, a lot of people don't know about it. And it is possible to have a very healthy sex life when you live with herpes, and the transmission rates are very low, and people always respect you when you tell them whether they're okay with it or not. They always respect you more. And that creates already a foundation of trust within the
Mm.
relationship because that person is only as confident as you are in yourself. And if
Ooh.
you show up with confidence in this conversation, they can only trust you. But if you show up, full of emotion and shame and guilt and fear, they're going to feel that and they're going to be like, ah,
No,
you
thank
know?
you.
Yeah, they'll if you're freaked out, they're going to be freaked out because they can only trust you with how you're handling it within yourself.
Mm,
So that's really important too, is that you have to be confident going into these conversations. And if you're not feeling confident, it's really important to learn more about herpes and how it works and how you can prevent transmission and how you can manage it within yourself. Because when you learn about that, you will feel more empowered and confident. You'll see it as
mm.
just like you'll see it as a virus. It's as common as the cold.
Yeah, yeah. Well, it's
Like
interesting too. I think herpes is one version of many different herpes viruses, and one of them is the chicken pox. And
we've
kids
all had
kids get
chicken
chicken
pox.
pox, and nobody's like, "Oh my gosh, what happened to you?" It's just, well, I've got chicken pox.
Well, it just goes to show you that the stigma comes from the sex part, and we're all out here having sex.
Yes, we are. Say it again for the people in the back.
We're all out here having sex, but that's where the stigma of herpes and any other STI comes from, is because it's sexually transmitted. So,
Mm,
STIs are part of being a sexually active human. You can do everything right. Wear a condom, sleep with one person one time, and still get herpes. Herpes doesn't pick and choose who it happens to. It just happens sometimes. Sometimes it's bad luck. but this is why it's important to have these open conversations about it, just to, really talk about it as sexual partners. It's important. And it's also important for people to understand what their partner, what experience they've had.
Mm-hmm.
When was the last time they were tested? I never used to ask that. And I
Mm.
used to be so happy that they would accept me that I had herpes and sleep with them pretty much right away without even understanding. "Well, actually, when was the last time you were tested?"
Yeah.
Like, have you ever had somebody? Sometimes I'll lead with the conversation. Have you ever had somebody tell you that they have an STI before?
Oh, mm-hmm, mm-hmm,
It's a really good way to open up the conversation. Um, but yeah. And I always
yeah.
also say, like, it's important for me to share this with you before we have sex because I wouldn't want you to find out after.
Mm, mm-hmm.
And people always respect that.
That's so interesting. I feel like so okay, so now I'm curious about sort of the like the nuts and bolts of it. Is this something that you usually find is helpful to do in person? Do you like to do it over text message before you even meet up with a person? Is there anything about that's been supportive for you in your past?
I have such varied experiences with
Yeah.
that. I've like gone to the point where I've put it in my dating profile because I can't be bothered having the conversation over and over again. It's exhausting.
Mm-hmm,
Like, even
mm-hmm.
though I go into these conversations, it's, knowing that it's inevitable is just like, you never know what's going to happen and how the person's going to react,
Mm-hmm.
which is exhausting, to be honest. So it really
Yes.
depends on,
Highlight bold that.
yeah, it's like dating is already exhausting. Layering on dating with herpes. Oh, dear God. But I think it also depends on the relationship and the connection I have with the person. If I know them, if I know it's maybe going to be a bit more intimate, or if I know that it's going to be more than just once, I'll tell them in person. Sometimes I'll tell them over text because it's just easier.
Yeah.
Sometimes if it's like sexting right away and they want to meet up, I'll just tell them over text, "Hey,
Mm.
before we meet, I want to make sure I'm not wasting my time here. Like,
Mm.
I will share with you that I have herpes. Are you, and then kind of go into it from there. But if it's kind of like, yeah, if it's a slow burn, I've gone on one date with a guy, I'm still feeling out if I like him or not. Go on another date, still feeling it out, and then it starts progressing, then
Hmm.
I'll most likely at that point I'll tell them in person.
I see. Yeah, that it makes sense because it also is it's your body. It's you telling people your medical history. And so it makes sense that you wouldn't just like slap it like a bumper sticker on the back of your car, like, hey, whatever. It's I like the idea of asking, have you ever had conversations about STIs? Because you can read from someone's body language if they're a safe person to be having that conversation with, because that's also like your mental health and your emotional health are also part of the conversation. It's not just how this person feels about herpes, which is what I feel like you're saying. You're like, tell me about what you're doing to keep yourself healthy. And
Exactly.
do
Yeah,
you do you ever find that people will feel fine maybe in the moment and then they have follow-up questions like the next day or next couple days?
that happened to me this summer. Yeah, sometimes that happens. I had a guy, I told him that I had herpes and he didn't flinch. And then when it
Mhm.
was about to come time to have sex, I stopped him and I was like, "I just want to make sure that you understood what I said and that you're okay with it." And
Uh-huh.
he like, in the heat of the moment, I was, "Yeah, sure, fine."
Hmm.
A couple days later, I get a text message from him freaking out.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah,
How did you manage that? Or what was that like for you?
I at that point I was really turned off because I was just like, come on, man. You know, I did my part in making
Hmm.
twice. I went over and above to
You
make
did.
sure he was comfortable. And he what consented. and I felt like he had buyer's remorse, and it made me feel really
Mm,
shitty
yeah.
because then it was also me having to educate him, and I was like, ew, you know,
You're
like
like, let me just send you a little Venmo request because this is what I do for work.
we don't even have Venmo in Canada. Oh my God. Um, but I was like, look, if there's anybody that you can try, I tried to give him all the reassurance in the world, and
Mm,
he ghosted me.
mm,
And 3 months later, he texted me with an apology and
wow.
also asking me back, like kind of trying to hint that he wanted to hang out again. And I was like, while I appreciate the apology, it's going to be a no for
Yeah,
me because you made me feel just completely disrespected and disregarded and like icky about myself when I don't need to feel like that and I don't feel like that. Like there are so many people who are okay with it, whether they know a lot about it or not, but they trust me,
mm,
you know?
mhm.
And I know everybody is different, but it just was such a turn off. And that's where I could kind of take my power back and be like, ew,
Yeah,
I'm so glad that these people are showing their true colors because that's somebody that I would never want to be with anyways.
absolutely.
I've gotten rejected so many times. But when I look at the people who have rejected me, I'm just like, oh God, those aren't the people that I would want to sleep with or be with.
I know they're not worthy of your Samantha Jones sauce.
Uh-uh. No.
Uh,
And they're the ones who are missing out because I know that it's not a big deal.
mhm,
Is transmission possible? Is there a risk of transmission? Yes. But they're more likely to get herpes from somebody off the street who doesn't know that they have it because
mm,
a lot of people have it and don't know because most of the
mhm.
time it's asymptomatic. They're more likely to get somebody herpes from somebody like that than from me.
Ooh, okay. Can we bold, underline, and put that in big letters? There is something about being with someone that knows that they have herpes because when you have herpes, you're managing it and you're paying attention and you're, yeah, like it's interesting that maybe being with someone that already has herpes could be safer than just assuming that everybody doesn't.
Exactly. But it's funny, some people would rather not know because when they know, it's all they think about, it's
Mm,
all they worry about. Not everybody is like that, obviously, but there's a lot of people who are like that. And it's just like, okay, I can't be with somebody like that who's going to constantly worry about
right.
it. I need you to trust me.
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
it's an interesting thing. Like I said earlier, there's so much layered onto herpes, HPV, vaginal health, like especially, yeah, STIs. There's so much layered on top of it.
Yeah, well, I think you really hit the nail on the head, right? It's because it involves sex. If it didn't involve sex, pardon my French, but people wouldn't give a fuck. They'd be like, "Oh, I got a cold because I touched a doorknob. Like I walked around a grocery store and now I have a sinus infection." Like it's because we need to change the channel and the stigma around sex. If you had like a big billboard that you could write and rewrite and sort of intersect things about sex that you just wish could, like a fairy godmother, just put into general public and people would just know, and so we wouldn't have to deal with all the stigma around sex. What are some of the things that you would put up there in big letters?
Well, I was going to comment on your last comment,
Yeah, go
walking
for
to
it.
the grocery store getting a cold. And this is what I would put on this billboard as well is cold sores are herpes. And people don't realize that.
Mm-hmm.
And because a lot of people get cold sores when they're kids,
Mm-hmm.
their mom or grandma or whatever who has cold sores kissing them, they don't see it as a problem because it's not a sexually transmitted thing.
Mm-hmm.
So they don't even realize A, that cold sores are the herpes virus, and B, that it can be transmitted genitally.
Interesting. Okay.
People, 1 in 4 people have oral cold sores, which is
Hmm.
HSV1 the majority of the time. That HSV1 cold sore can be transmitted to someone's genitals via oral sex, resulting them in having genital herpes. So that non-sexually transmitted cold sore is then sexually transmitted, and the person who gets it on their genitals has to deal with it completely differently than the
Mm,
one who got cold sores from their family when they were a kid.
whew, that
And
part.
and people aren't disclosing that they have cold sores. And you can have a cold sore and obviously pass it when you have an active cold sore, but you can also not have a cold sore and pass it.
Yeah.
And people don't know this.
They don't. Well, and I think that that's really powerful. I also think that taking away a little bit of the shame and blame around it, the idea of like, well, how could you do this to me? Kind of vibe where it's like, I mean, we were kissing. We were having great sex. That's what was happening right now. It wasn't like someone set out to quote do something to you, which in that beautiful kind of illustration, it's like receiving like affection and kisses from a mother to a child. We see that as like showing affection. Like this is valuable. This is part of being a human being. This is actually necessary and healthy for growth and development. And I would argue that sexuality, like having the type of sex that feels fulfilling for you as an individual, like listeners and also us, like that feels also like part of human growth and development and important. And so it's not like, oh, I'm setting out to do this thing to you. It's like, I'm having a moment with you. I'm inviting you into my space and I want to be in your space. Yeah, that's beautiful. It's a beautiful reframe.
Yeah. I feel like a lot where there a lot, how can I say this? I feel like where a lot of the shame comes from is people tell me that I just wish I knew better, you
Ooh,
know?
you
I
better about what?
I wish I had known. If I had known about herpes, then maybe I could have done something different. Had I known cold sores were herpes, I wouldn't have let him go down on me, or we would have maybe had more conversations about that. If I had known, a lot of people feel ashamed because they wish they hadn't had sex with the person that they had sex with who gave them herpes, or I've heard it so often, like, I knew I shouldn't have had sex with them, but I did anyway. I got out of a 10-year marriage, and the first person I had sex with, I got herpes. I should have known better. I should have
Mm,
known better. And I was like, how could you have known better?
right.
How could you know what you don't know? Now you know, and hindsight's 2020. But how could you have known that in the moment? You were living your life,
Yeah.
enjoying one of the most pleasurable experiences in your life, and people are so ashamed. And I'm
Mm,
like, where is that shame coming from?
yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
because you were living in the moment and feeling empowered and getting it,
Yeah, and getting it.
and getting and I'm like, why do you feel ashamed about that? Well, I wish I would have known better. Well, it's
Yeah.
it's really interesting.
Yeah. I mean, I think a lot of that, I mean, it comes down to probably passed down ideals. And maybe, I mean, I know in my family, in my life, sex was really, really, really not talked about. And it was like I could see the discomfort of my mother and I could feel the tension between my parents. And it was kind of this like well-known thing. Like I remember before I got married, actually, my mom was like, I mean, like mortified to even take me in to get to have a gyno like visit to get birth control. Like she was just kind of like, I don't like, and it was getting closer to my wedding. And I'm like, not really looking to get like a dude and a baby at the same time. Like I was like 20, I think at the time, but I'm like, I don't know enough, but I know enough about this, so I should have that. So my mom was just totally avoidant, but kind of my family friend's mom, like kind of like second mother, she was like, make yourself available like chocolate cake on a counter, and men will just get sick of it because it'll be too much sweetness, and then you won't have to deal with them doing this stuff anymore. And I was like, okay, so I have two options. One, I either just completely ignore this. The other side, I just make myself, just an open book. But neither part of it had anything to do with my pleasure or that I was even a part of the conversation. And I really think that, at least in my experience, so much of the shame around my own vaginal health and like I was diagnosed with vulvodynia. I had like a bunch of these things, and it was more this thing of like being taken completely out of the conversation because female pleasure just isn't spoken about. It's not. And so if you are going after pleasure, if you're talking about, your body, that's what I'm hearing is the passed down messages of our mothers, our grandmothers, our, other women that were just quiet and not even realizing that pleasure was a part of the conversation for them. It's like my big soapbox, like women are, and people with vaginas are meant to have pleasure when they're busy doing cool things.
Yeah, totally. Hang on, I'm just going to turn on this light. It's generational trauma. Hang on.
Go for it.
Generational trauma. Oh God, that's so awful. Wait. Wait. Oh, there we go. Okay, that's better.
Yay.
Generational trauma is such a thing. And it's, when you're looking at, when I look at a holistic approach to vaginal health and how I help clients is it's not just the diet and supplements and stuff like that. Yes, but it's also very much the emotional stuff around
Mm,
it and the trauma and how that impacts your nervous system and how like your subconscious and your nervous system remembers this shit. And the generational trauma that's passed down, like when you think about our grandmothers and our great grandmothers' generations, like, oh my God,
right.
couldn't even vote. Like women have been so suppressed. They were meant only for, reproducing and having babies. It's
Hmm.
and we still carry that trauma and shame it within us. And it's
Right.
changing. But of course, our vaginas are stressed out. We hold a lot of trauma in our vaginas. And of course, there's still so much shame and stigma around female pleasure, people with vaginas pleasure, sexual pleasure for women, because for men, like I posted recently about this guy who was more upset about my body count
Oh my
because I've
gosh, I
been
saw
single for
that.
10 years. Yeah, because I've been single for 10 years and I disclosed that I had herpes, and he was more concerned about my body count because he was assuming that because I've been single for so long, I've had multiple partners.
Mm.
And I'm like, that's none of your fucking business. Why does
Uh,
that even matter? Like, this was before you. Like, am I not allowed to be independent and empowered and liberated and free
mm,
and live my own life, not based on a man? And I've been married twice. Like, I've enjoyed my life. Sure, I've had lots of partners and hoe phases, but not always. I go in spurts. So
yeah.
be celibate for a long period of time. Then I'll go through a whole phase. Then I'll be celibate. I don't know.
Well, what's funny about that is it kind of seems, and this is a channel because the podcast has changed the channel. This is a channel I'd like to change. It sort of seems like it doesn't matter whether you're a woman that's expressing your sexuality and having partners, or whether you're a woman that doesn't. Neither one seems to be favorable. Like you're either like a prude or going through a whore phase or whatever. And it's like, can I just live? Can I just live
Yeah.
with this? Because the other thing I think is fascinating, I learned through my vulvodynia, and it's muscular as well. There's a lot of the tension and the experience of people that have vaginas, and even, I mean, men as well, all of us have a pelvic floor. All of us have muscles that attach from our hips into our pubis and affect our variety of genitalia. And especially for, I believe, women, our hips hold betrayal. That's where energetically, and our low back holds financial instability and unworthiness. And so as we're over here trying our best to be like, fresh as a daisy with our whatever, it's like the stories just keep coming down of ways of feeling betrayed, the ways we betray ourselves when we're mean to ourselves for having that great date and letting ourselves get carried away and having a good time, like to, the financial instability of a lot of women not being paid the same. And like all of that is dealing with the low back and the hips, which is affecting our vaginas. And then on top of it, it's like, now eat right and be ready and don't have anything wrong with you, but also know how to like rock my world, but with zero practice with anyone else. Go on, you can do it, right? Like,
It's so crazy, it's the Madonna whore complex.
mm,
Like, especially in the perception of men and, the whole patriarchy. Oh God, it's so sad how it's so real. It's also very influenced by religion.
mhm,
And
mhm,
like, I just can't, it's so upsetting. It's like you
mhm,
can't do anything right as a woman. You can't do anything right. It's just, um, yeah. And then layer on the vaginal stuff on top of that, vulvodynia, yeast infections, bacterial vaginosis, UTIs, herpes, HPV, chlamydia, like any of the other, like all these things are
lions and
coming
tigers
from
and
men
bears.
most of the time.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it's the thing of what if we even thought about topics of intimacy as in you take care of your own body and also whatever partner you're planning to be with, like whatever is going on between both of you, because aren't some infections can actually be passed back and forth between couples as well. And it's like I've seen some of my girlfriends that have been on just rounds of different medication,
Yeah.
and no one thinks to I actually mentioned it because I follow your page because I'm a Yoni Nutritionist fan, but it was like, has your partner like been tested at all? Are they taking care of, their health as well? And after months and months and months of this, finally he got tested and got put on some medication and a lot of the stuff stopped. It was like, but there's so much responsibility, it seems like, on vagina having humans to be on top of our health and protecting
Oh my
everyone
gosh.
else. Yeah.
Men, people with penises are asymptomatic carriers of different bacterias that affect our vaginas because our anatomies are different. We have innies and it's more sensitive with the mucous membranes. And they have outies and they don't have the symptoms like we do. They carry the bacteria that causes BV, ureaplasma, mycoplasma. And, they don't have any symptoms, but we have to deal with all of the consequences, the symptoms, the treatment, the shame. And it's really sad.
Hmm.
Yeah,
What?
and it's unfair.
Indeed. We were just talking earlier about how you and I are both Libras. We do not have time and space for things to be unfair.
No.
I'm curious then. So, because we also want to educate and involve people so it's not like finger pointing as much. What would you say for a person that is listening that maybe is, has an outie, as you say, and wants to be a part of helping their partner that has a vagina live a happy, healthy, fulfilling life? Are there things that, our male allies can do to help our beautiful little kitty boxes?
Yes, get tested regularly, even if you don't have symptoms, because most of these STIs are asymptomatic,
Okay.
especially in men. And if you notice that if you're with a partner and she keeps getting recurring infections, it's also important for the outie havers,
Uh-huh.
um, people with penises to look at their diet and lifestyle as well, because the alkalinity of their semen, the quality of their semen also affects our vaginal microbiomes, vaginal pH levels. Men who smoke, people who smoke are, even more at risk of getting these infections.
Mm,
And if they're getting, these bacterial infections frequently, they need to get tested as well.
okay.
And
Yeah.
everyone needs to know that herpes tests are not part of STI tests, and you have to ask separately for them. You're not getting tested for herpes when you get an STI test.
Say it again for the people in the back.
When you get an STI test, you're not being tested for herpes. You have to ask specifically for a herpes test, which is separate.
That I
People think that they're getting tested for everything, but they're not.
That's so fascinating too. Why do you think that is?
Because herpes tests are often not accurate. So they'll come back as false positives and false negatives. And because of the stigma, that really freaks people out. So they
Mm,
just don't include them on tests. They just leave it until the person actually has symptoms of herpes to then test them. Or if the person has been exposed to the herpes virus, they can do a blood test and see if there's the immunoglobulins in their blood. But that's not always 100% accurate. And this is why more people than we know live with herpes. Herpes is
mm.
so common. But I don't know why there's still such a stigma, because we're all out here having sex.
We're all I think
It's
that might be
like,
the tagline. That might be the tagline of this episode. We're all out here having sex. Like,
yeah,
can we just, yeah.
especially nowadays, everyone's fucking each other. So many, polyamorous, non-monogamous relationships nowadays. You can't you can't totally be naive to not even knowing anything about STIs and thinking it's not going to happen to you. No,
Mm,
because that's what everybody says. I never thought it would happen to me. Neither did I.
you're
But
right.
like these things don't happen because we've done something bad. That's what everybody says. Oh,
Mm,
this is my punishment. I've heard so many times. Well, no, it's not,
yeah,
because you're a sexually active human, and just had bad luck. It happens.
right. Well, I mean, it's yeah, that also is a thing. I mean, we get to choose the label that we put on our stuff as well. It's like if herpes is a punishment, then we're gonna carry that energy. A lot of my work is helping people somatically move through the stories that are held in their bodies. And it's like, if the story that you're holding is that you're being punished for something, I will guarantee you, like on my life, your neck hurts, your shoulders hurt, your hips hurt, and you might even have some creakiness in your knees. Your body is remembering, and I often tell my clients too when they're like, "Oh, I have a bad shoulder." Like, "Oh, awesome. How long would you like it to be that way?" And they're like, "What do you mean?" And I'm like, the longer we tell the story that this is the bad shoulder, our shoulder, I like to think of as an eager, like puppy, that's like, I just want to do whatever you want from me. So if you keep telling me I'm bad, I'm going to be the best bad I can be for you. Like, I'm gonna coil over. I'm gonna make creaky noises. I'm gonna make sure that whatever you say goes, boss, like that kind of thing. And so, what I've noticed with my clients when I'm either doing virtual sessions or, if my hands actually on them, when we move through the part of the muscle and we start changing the story, and the muscle gets to tell the story, it releases. It's like, oh, I get to be a different version. I get to be known as something else. And so this idea of I have an STI because I'm being punished, can you like it's putting this all this pressure of quote punishment and problem on your most sensitive microbiome that's already managing a lot of things. Why would we talk about that as like the holder of consequences as opposed to like, the vibrant, sassy Samantha Jones part of the body that is? End rant.
You know where that punishment comes from, that punishment story comes from, that's rooted in religion.
Mm,
And that's generational um, lack of awareness, lack of education. And, when you can start, it's hard to pull yourself out when you're telling yourself, when you're in that spiral and telling yourself these stories and really believing it. It's hard to be like, that's religion. I don't believe in that anymore. Or even if you
mm,
are religious, you don't have to tell yourself those stories that are true because you're not being punished. That's just
mhm.
what you're conditioned to believe through bullshit, uneducated people.
Right. Right. And honest,
Fear-based education.
yeah, yeah. So it feels to me too like a theme is um we can change the channel on what we're thinking about when we're educated. And when we're educated by people that like you that are holding the candle of hope and authenticity and not like, oh, like I did your candida cleanse. It's part of the like, oh my gosh, and that was like a whole thing. I'm excited to get excited to talk about that too because um I think it was week 3, it was like all of this hidden emotion came up and I was like, oh, I eat a lot of sugar when I'm lonely or when I'm sad or when I'm just needing like a quick hit and when I'm not getting that quick hit, every single layer of need reared its ugly head and I was just like, oh my gosh, I should not be around people. Yeah. I don't know where I got off on that tangent about, but I want to hear more about candida, like your candida cleanse, the process, like the ways that we can start moving away from these stories of this is happening to you and stepping into the power of like, this is your incredible body, your banging ass body that you're out here doing life with. How can you get to know her more, nourish her, like, not make it sound like you're a problem, if that makes sense. I'd love to know more about the candida cleanse.
Yeah. What I try to tell people is because I hear this all the time, why is this happening to me? And I get it because I was there for a long time. But
Mm-hmm.
when I started to change my mindset to what is this trying to teach me, I started feeling more in control and empowered in my own health. And that I
Mm,
actually have the ability to take back that power and do something about it. Because a lot of people feel powerless, they feel victimized, and they feel like they're kind of just stuck because they want to change, but they don't know how to change and they don't know what to do. So this is why I'm here. The Candida diet is the reason why I started doing this work. Like I was telling you earlier, within 4 weeks, my symptoms cleared up, and I was like, oh my God.
yeah.
Isn't anybody talking about this? So, candida overgrowth is a funny thing because doctors don't talk about it. Unfortunately, there's not a lot of scientific research around it, as is anything women's health. Um,
That part.
so, like a lot of people still don't believe it and don't believe that it works. But when
Mm,
you are getting recurring health issues, especially recurring vaginal and anything vaginal health related,
mm,
recurring yeast infections, bacterial vaginosis, UTIs, even genital herpes outbreaks, even HPV, anything, even vulvodynia.
mm-hmm,
It's there are processes in the body that are going on that are connected to this. There's a science behind it. It's connected to your hormones, it's connected to your immune system, it's connected to your nervous system, it's
mm.
connected to your blood sugar, and there's one other thing. It's obviously connected to your gut health.
Yeah, yeah,
All of this
yeah.
stuff, when you're getting any chronic health issue, the first thing that needs to be addressed is your gut health because all of these things are connected to your gut health. And that's why a candida diet, if you're getting any kind of recurring vaginal health issue, this is why your diet is so important because you have to heal the root cause of that first in order
Mm,
for the other systems to function better. That will help then to get rid of any kind of bad bacterial overgrowth, replenish the good bacterial overgrowth, both in your gut and vaginal microbiomes,
mm,
balance your vaginal pH levels, boost your immune system, reduce inflammation, balance out your blood sugar, and support your nervous system through all of this. And you do that
Mm,
with your diet. And it really is about eliminating any kind of problem foods
mm-hmm,
that could be causing inflammation, that's weakening your immune system, that's imbalancing your hormones, that's causing havoc on your nervous system. And it's more about getting rid of any of the problem foods, but introducing foods that are going to support your gut health in terms of rebuilding the good bacteria so that it overpopulates the bad.
mm,
And
mm-hmm.
when you do that consistently over a period of time, because this is the problem, is everybody wants a quick fix, a quick pill, but the key is consistency over time. You
Mm,
can do that. That's when you start noticing small changes. You start feeling better in your body. Your skin starts clearing up and glowing. You start noticing, oh, your clothes are fitting better because the water retention and the inflammation is kind of just like the weight's just
mm,
falling off. Like it's not necessarily just weight, it's inflammation, water retention.
mm-hmm.
Then you start noticing you don't have any vaginal infections anymore. You have more
Yay.
energy and mental clarity, and you feel better than you ever have. You're sleeping better, you're enjoying your life again, you're happy.
Mm,
You find that over time you don't need the foods that you so heavily relied on, like what you said, sugar. Like you start realizing, oh my God, I don't need that as much as I thought. Like coffee is probably the most common one I hear.
okay.
It's like, oh my God, I can't live without coffee. A week without it, they're like, oh my God, I don't even want it. I don't even need it anymore.
Mm,
It really does change your relationship with food and teaches you what and how to eat that works for your body. And then when you start getting rid of these vaginal infections and you can start enjoying your life again, oh my God. But a candida diet is only like temporary. It depends on the severity of your symptoms, but I
mm-hmm.
do it within like about 6 to 8 weeks is what I recommend. Some people need to do it longer if their symptoms are really bad, but usually around 6 to 8 weeks, consistency, discipline over that period of time. Then you can start reintroducing foods back into your diet and see how your body responds. And
Mm,
that's when you learn because
mm,
suddenly you haven't been eating pasta for 6 weeks and then you eat pasta again and then you get a big cystic acne on your forehead because your body's like, it's
yeah.
inflammatory. You know, you have a glass
Yeah.
of wine and then your lips swell up and you get a yeast infection. Then it's like, okay, that's the
Both
extreme.
sets of lips are not happy with that.
It's so weird. Like whenever I drink wine again after a candida diet, my top lip, the outs, the out, the outside of my
Uh-huh.
lip always gets really chapped and red. And
Hmm.
I think it's a histamine response. Like it's interesting. Your body will tell you very quickly what foods it likes and doesn't like. And then it's about 80% clean eating and 20% enjoy your life.
Love.
And
Love.
then it's like a lifestyle. It's not, especially for us who are more sensitive, who are yeasty girls like me, who are more sensitive to it, because I always have been. I've really had to change my lifestyle around my vagina, especially with the herpes stuff. Um,
Hmm.
but now I know how to manage it and it's working.
Well, I mean, the other thing too, I was thinking as you were listing this stuff off, it's like, oh, it helps your nervous system and your gut and your immune system and your brain fog and all these things. I'm like thinking about a lot of the reasons why, at least I lean towards those foods are things that have to do with my intuition feels off, or I'm feeling sad, or I'm feeling lonely, or I'm feeling low energy, or, all of that, which is affecting all those things that you said. So, while it feels like you're losing something, it's not really losing something. It's um, re allocating the energy towards something else in a way that feeds you back so that you can keep moving in your life and have energy and feel your best, be able to strut as you're walking around. Like
But it's
I was.
not, people think it's restrictive, but it's not. Like,
Mhm.
probably be eating more than you normally do on this diet. You're just eating more of the right things and you're temporarily eliminating any kind of problematic trigger foods that you don't want to eat anyway
Mm-hmm.
during that time because they're contributing to your symptoms. And we all love our comfort foods. We all have our moments. We're all human. We all want what we can't have. And when we can't have it, we like protest, like kids. But
Mm-hmm.
it's like it becomes kind of like a spiritual journey or a
Mm-hmm.
mindfulness journey because you start to realize, like you did, like, oh my God, I've been so dependent on these things for my own comfort because of I was really upset about this breakup, or I've been like
Mm-hmm.
really deeply sad in my life for this reason or that. And it's like, oh my God.
Totally.
And that's when it starts becoming so much more of just a diet. It's a complete holistic approach where you start like, holy shit, things start really, showing
Yeah.
up for you that are so clear that weren't before.
Ugh. And isn't that what we want? We're saying, I want autonomy. I want to feel empowered. I want to, and nothing is more empowered, I think, than a person that knows themselves, that's comfortable in their own skin, that, you know, can make educated choices. Like even going to the grocery store. I remember I was like, the first couple weeks of this candida diet, I'm like not even going to the store. I'm having my groceries delivered because I don't want to see all the gummy everything on the end caps because it will grab me and tell me that, I've earned it somehow.
Right? It's
Yeah.
it's you made such a good point is we use these treats and I do it too as a reward.
Mm-hmm.
Dopamine, it's a reward system. We did a good job, we deserve a treat.
Mm-hmm.
I think so much about how I, as a kid, my parents always would take me for ice cream and reward me with ice cream when I was a
Mm-hmm.
kid, when I was good. And I'm just like, isn't that crazy? Like, isn't it
Yeah.
crazy? We always celebrate birthdays with a cake and like,
Mm-hmm.
um, it's really interesting. Yeah.
A cake and alcohol.
Cake and alcohol, yeah. And I go to the grocery store now and like I'll sometimes buy ice cream or treat myself, whatever, but most of the time I just walk right by it because I'm like, I don't want it. If
Mm,
my body really wants it, I'll have it. But like now I'm just conditioned because I'm like, no, that's gonna make me feel worse if I eat it.
yeah. Yeah. Well, and that's a worthiness conversation, right? Like you're worthy to feel good in your body. Like it's the thinking past this moment, which is powerful. It's really powerful to I also like to tell my clients a lot too, like whatever part of your body, like for me, developing vulvodynia was a huge thing where my mind and my body, like my vagina became one of my allies. I like to think of her as an ally that is letting me know, like, this is a good situation. This isn't where we should be because, like clockwork, she will start firing off fireworks for me if I'm in a situation that is not good for me. And like, thank you, body, for knowing first before it goes all the way up the chain in my head and rummages around through social conditioning before I start to do a thing. My vagina knows, she will tell me. And I think that what you're talking about, even walking by the foods and checking in, and your body now is an ally to you and says, that's all right, girl. No thanks. Like, could
Yeah.
you make me one of those cool immunity shot things that you make, or like one of your yummy? I forget what there's a certain drink you make that you show on Instagram, and I'm always like, that looks so beautiful.
Yeah, the ginger shot.
Yeah, yeah, the ginger
Yeah,
shot,
it's
and
good.
also I think it's like a matcha
Oh yeah.
something. Every time I'm like mesmerized. I watch it like 3 times. Like, that looks really good.
It is good. Yeah, I mean,
Um,
so many different little things that you can start doing. It doesn't have to be like a complete cold turkey thing. It can be just like adding a little bit of layers onto these new habits and just adding another extra little thing onto it. And what's sad is that a lot of people really feel like they don't deserve to feel better. And it's easier for
mm,
them to stay in their comfort zone where they feel comfortable and they're just used to dealing with these infections or whatever other chronic health issue. So they just deal with it because it's easier for them than doing the work with all the stuff that comes up, you know, which I understand, but it's just like you don't have to live like that. And it's not as hard as you think. Once you just take the step, it's like going back to the gym when you haven't been in the gym in a long time. You're just like, dread it. But you know it's good for you, but it's like, fuck.
Yeah.
I don't want to do it. But it's like you deserve to feel better. You can feel better. You don't have to live like this and feel stuck anymore.
Yeah.
And there's luckily people like us who can, give you the tools and make it easier for you so you don't have to figure it all out on your own.
Absolutely. You enjoyed that first part of the conversation as much as I did. Adrienne is freaking joy, so much fun, even more fun. I was telling her too that she was even more fun to interview than even chatting with her or engaging with her content online, which is amazing because all of her stuff is so rad. I hope this episode helped to open your eyes if you are a person that has a yoni or not, if you're someone that cares for someone that has a yoni, or I don't know, maybe came from a parent that has a yoni. They're everywhere. And I feel like there is so much need for us to start talking about vaginal health differently, talk about sex and sexual activity differently, and just remove some of the toxic shame that ends up living in these very sensitive regions and parts of the experience of being a yoni having human. So hopefully you enjoyed this as much as I did. Again, this is part 1. So tune in next time for part 2 to get even more goodness from Adrienne. Also, be checking in the show notes because Adrienne does a Fuck Candida cleanse starting in January. You can get on her wait list or get ready for that. There's also a healing herpes holistically program that she does. And just her content on Instagram is fire, y'all. So head on over there, educate yourself in a space that has no space for shame, all space for sexiness. And if this conversation sparked anything within you where your body was remembering something, maybe you've had STIs in your life, or maybe you've been with a partner that has been unfaithful to you and that has created something, living within your body as well. Maybe you just want to have more autonomy and ownership over your pleasure. Maybe you came from purity culture and your body is holding the remnants of that, and it's making sex not as pleasurable as you were hoping it would be. I love all those topics. That is one of my passions. A lot of the personal work I've done myself, and I will put my link in the show notes as well. Let's connect. Let's chat. Let's change the channel on that shit because you deserve to live an embodied, full, pleasure-dripping, juicy life, my dear. No matter what your STI status is, no matter what your relationship status is, you are worthy of pleasure, play, joy, love, owning your body, understanding the best ways to take care of yourself, and changing the channel on the societal bullshit that especially targets women around shame around your body. There ain't no time for that. We are changing that fucking channel. All right, babes. Thanks so much for hanging out, for listening. Thank you also for any of the non-yoni having folks that are listening to this podcast. As you're learning about it, you can date responsibly. You can have these STI conversations more empathically and just hearing kind of the behind the scenes of all that's going into both like Adrienne's life and parts of my life as well. I hope that this will be something that sticks with you as maybe somebody discloses their, herpes status, or maybe, you have a new partner and you just want to be able to be more empathic to their experience. Thank you so much for listening in and along. This is making dating, relationship, sex, life, healing possible. You get to be part of the conversation too, because we're all out here having sex, right? So why not look out for each other? Why not have conversations in kind ways? Why not shock the shit out of society by not leaning into the stigmas and allowing those stigmas to die off with our generation? Wouldn't that be fucking great? Yeah, it would. All right, babes. Thanks for hanging out. Thanks for being along. Check the show notes for all the goodies. And this was another episode of Change the Channel podcast.